The community center looked exactly like what it was. A simple room with folding chairs, basic decorations, and borrowed flowers from the grocery store down the street. But to me it was perfect. "I can't believe she's doing this to us," Dad muttered to Mom as they took their seats in the front row. His voice carried more than he probably intended, and several guests turned to look. "A community center wedding? What will people think?" Mom nodded along, adjusting her dress uncomfortably. "I told her we'd pay for a proper venue. The country club or at least the hotel downtown. But no, she insisted on this place." My fiancé Michael squeezed my hand as we watched from the small side room where I was getting ready. Through the crack in the door we could see the entire wedding party, all 43 guests, settling into their seats. "Are you sure you don't want to tell them?" Michael asked quietly. "About your real job, I mean. About everything." I shook my head, adjusting my simple white dress in the mirror. "They made their choice 5 years ago when they cut me off for embarrassing the family. They said I was throwing my life away, remember? But look at what you've accomplished." "They don't want to look," I interrupted gently. "They want me to be ashamed of my choices so they can feel superior about theirs." Through the door I could hear my brother Kevin talking to his wife Sandra. "I still can't believe she invited us after all this time. I mean, what's she trying to prove with this budget wedding?" "Maybe she's finally ready to admit she made a mistake," Sandra replied. "Maybe she wants to come back to the family business now that she's seen how the real world works." I almost laughed. If only they knew how the real world had actually worked out for me. 5 years ago, when I'd graduated from college with a degree in social work, my family had been horrified. Dad owned 3 successful insurance agencies, Kevin was a lawyer, and my sister Amanda was a corporate executive. They couldn't understand why I'd want to work with troubled kids for practically nothing, when I could have joined the family business and made real money. "You're wasting your education," Dad had said. "You're embarrassing this family." When I'd taken a job at a residential facility for at-risk youth instead of the sales position Dad had arranged for me at his company, they'd stopped speaking to me entirely. "Sarah's going through a phase," I'd heard Mom tell her friends. "She'll come back when she realizes that helping people doesn't pay the bills." But I hadn't come back. Instead, I'd thrown myself into my work, spending 12-hour days with kids who'd been written off by everyone else. I'd worked nights and weekends to earn additional certifications. I'd taken on extra training, attended conferences, and slowly built a reputation as someone who could reach the most difficult cases. And somewhere along the way I'd caught the attention of some very important people. "Sarah," Michael said, looking out at the guests, "your dad just said something about being surprised you could even afford a wedding cake." I sighed. "He's probably wondering how I'm paying for any of this on a social worker's salary." The truth was, I wasn't paying for it on a social worker's salary. Because while my family had been dismissing my career choice, that career had taken some unexpected turns. 2 years ago, the governor had been looking for someone to head a new statewide initiative on youth rehabilitation. Someone with extensive field experience, advanced certifications, and a proven track record of success with difficult cases. Someone who understood both the academic theory and the street-level reality of working with at-risk youth. My name had come up in every conversation. The appointment had come with a significant salary increase, a staff of 40, and direct access to state and federal funding for innovative programs. Within 18 months, our initiative had reduced youth recidivism by 37% statewide. The success had caught national attention. 6 months ago, I'd been invited to Washington to consult on federal policy. 3 months ago, I'd been asked to join a presidential task force on juvenile justice reform. Last month, the president had personally called to thank me for my work and to invite me to speak at a national conference. But my family didn't know any of this, because they'd never bothered to ask about my work beyond their initial disapproval. Ladies and gentlemen, the small quartet we'd hired began playing the processional music. It was time. Michael kissed my cheek and went out to take his place at the altar. My matron of honor, Lisa, squeezed my hand. "You ready for this?" she asked. I looked out at the simple community center, at the folding chairs and grocery store flowers, at my family sitting in the front row looking vaguely embarrassed to be there. "I'm ready," I said. But as I stepped toward the door, my phone buzzed with a text message. I almost ignored it. Who texts someone during their wedding? But something made me look. It was from Governor Patricia Williams. "Sarah, I am so sorry I'm running late. Air Force One was delayed and we're just landing now. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Don't start without me. Patricia. I stared at the message, my heart starting to race. Governor Williams had said she'd try to make it if her schedule allowed, but I hadn't really expected her to show up. She was, after all, one of the busiest people in the state. But we'd developed a close working relationship over the past 2 years. She'd become not just my boss but a mentor and friend. When I'd mentioned that my father wouldn't be walking me down the aisle, he'd refused, saying he was too embarrassed by this whole spectacle. She'd offered to step in. Patricia Williams wants to walk me down the aisle? I'd asked, incredulous. Sarah, you've become like a daughter to me, she'd said. You've revolutionized youth services in this state. You've saved lives. If your family can't see what a remarkable woman you are, then I'd be honored to stand in their place. I'd assumed she was just being kind. I never imagined she'd actually show up. Sarah. Lisa was looking at me strangely. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. The governor is coming, I whispered. What governor? Governor Williams. She's going to walk me down the aisle. Lisa's eyes widened. The governor of the entire state? That Governor Williams. Before I could answer, we heard a commotion outside. Car doors slamming, official voices, the distinctive sound of a security detail mobilizing. Through the window I could see 3 black SUVs pulling up to the community center. Men in dark suits were getting out, speaking into earpieces, scanning the area with professional alertness. Inside the wedding venue, the quiet conversations had stopped entirely. I could hear confused murmurs, people asking each other what was happening. Sarah, Dad's voice carried from the main room. What's going on out there? I smoothed my dress and checked my reflection one last time. I guess we're about to find out. The front doors of the community center opened and Governor Patricia Williams walked in, flanked by 2 security agents. She was wearing an elegant navy blue suit and a warm smile, and she commanded the room instantly. Sorry I'm late, kiddo, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Air Force One was delayed and then the motorcade hit traffic. The silence in the room was absolute. Every single person, my family, Michael's family, our friends, was staring at the governor of our state as she walked directly toward me. Dad's mouth was literally hanging open. Mom looked like she was about to faint. Kevin had dropped his wedding program on the floor. Governor Williams, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, thank you so much for coming. He pulled me into a warm hug. I wouldn't miss this for anything. You know how proud I am of you. Proud. Dad's voice cracked as he said the word. The governor turned toward my family with a polite but slightly cool smile. You must be Sarah's parents. I'm Patricia Williams. The governor, Mom stammered. That's right. I've had the privilege of working closely with your daughter for the past 2 years. She's one of the most remarkable people I've ever met. Dad was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Working with Sarah? But she's just a social worker at some group home. Governor Williams raised an eyebrow. Sarah is the director of statewide youth rehabilitation initiatives. She reports directly to me. Her programs have revolutionized how we handle juvenile justice in this state. Director. Kevin's voice was barely a whisper. Sarah's work has been so successful that the president asked her to join a federal task force on juvenile justice reform, the governor continued. She's been consulting with the White House for the past 6 months. The looks on my family's faces were shifting from confusion to dawning realization to something that looked like shock. The White House. Amanda, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Sarah works with the White House? Works with them, advises them, speaks at their conferences, Governor Williams confirmed. Last month, the president personally called to thank Sarah for her contribution to federal policy development. I watched my father's face go through what looked like every emotion at once. Confusion, disbelief, embarrassment, and finally something that might have been pride. But, Mom said weakly, she never told us about any of this. Governor Williams looked at my parents with an expression that was polite but unmistakably pointed. Perhaps she would have, if you'd shown interest in her work instead of dismissing it. The silence that followed was deafening. Now then, the governor said, turning back to me with a bright smile, are you ready to get married? I believe I have a very important job to do. She offered me her arm and together we walked toward the doors that led into the main ceremony space. Behind us, I could hear my family whispering frantically to each other, trying to process what they'd just learned. Sarah, Dad called out as we reached the doors. Sarah, wait. I turned back to look at him. For the first time in 5 years, he was looking at me like he actually saw me. He started, then stopped. I had no idea. I know, I said quietly. I tried to tell you, but you didn't want to hear about my little social work job. The processional music started again and the doors opened. Every guest in the community center turned to watch as Governor Patricia Williams escorted me down the aisle. As we walked, I could hear whispered conversations throughout the room. Is that really the governor? She said Sarah works for the White House? I can't believe Sarah never mentioned. The president called her personally? When we reached the altar, Governor Williams hugged me again and whispered in my ear, "You've built something beautiful, Sarah. Don't let anyone make you feel small for the choices you've made." She took her seat in the front row, right next to my parents, who were staring at her like she was a mythical creature who had materialized in their community center. The ceremony proceeded, but I could tell that half the guests were still processing what they'd witnessed. My family kept glancing between me and the governor like they were trying to solve a puzzle. When Michael and I exchanged vows, I promised to continue building a life based on service and compassion. He promised to support my work, even when it meant late nights and difficult cases and criticism from people who didn't understand. As we kissed and the crowd applauded, I caught sight of my family in the front row. Dad was clapping, but his eyes were filled with tears. Mom looked stunned but was trying to smile. Kevin and Amanda were whispering to each other, probably comparing notes about everything they'd missed over the past 5 years. At the reception, held in the same community center with catered food from a local family restaurant, Governor Williams gave an impromptu speech. "I've known many dedicated public servants in my career," she said, raising her glass of sparkling cider, "but I've rarely met anyone with Sarah's combination of expertise, compassion, and results. She's transformed how we approach youth rehabilitation, and her work has literally saved hundreds of lives." The room erupted in applause. My family clapped too, but I could see they were still processing everything. After the governor left, with another security detail and another motorcade, my family approached me at the head table. "Sarah," Dad said, sitting down heavily in the chair next to me, "I owe you an apology." "Several apologies," Mom added quietly. "We had no idea," Amanda said. "When you said you were working in social services, we thought. You thought I was wasting my life," I finished for her. "You thought I was throwing away my education and embarrassing the family." "Yes," Dad admitted. "And we were wrong. We were so wrong." Kevin pulled up a chair. "Sarah, why didn't you tell us? About the promotion, about working with the governor, about the White House." I looked around at my family. These people who had dismissed my choices, cut me off, and refused to attend family gatherings for 5 years because they were ashamed of my career. "When would I have told you?" I asked gently. "You stopped taking my calls 3 years ago. You didn't invite me to Christmas or Kevin's promotion party or Amanda's housewarming. You made it clear that you didn't want to hear about my work unless I was ready to admit it was a mistake." The truth of what I was saying hit them like a physical blow. "Every time I tried to explain what I was doing," I continued, "you interrupted to tell me I was wasting my potential. Every time I tried to share something I was proud of, you changed the subject to when I was going to get a real job." "We thought we were helping," Mom said, tears starting to form in her eyes. "We thought we were motivating you to aim higher." "I did aim higher," I said. "I aimed so high that the President of the United States knows my name. I just aimed in a direction you didn't understand." Dad reached over and took my hand. "Sarah, can you ever forgive us?" I looked at this man who had raised me, who had once been proud of my accomplishments, who had let his own narrow definition of success blind him to what I was actually achieving. "Dad, I never stopped loving you," I said. "Any of you. I just needed you to respect my choices, even if you didn't understand them." "We want to understand now," Amanda said. "Will you tell us about your work? Really tell us." So I did. I told them about the residential facility where I'd started, about the kids who'd been written off by everyone else, about the programs I'd developed and the lives that had changed. I told them about the research I'd published, the conferences where I'd spoken, the policies I'd helped shape. I told them about Marcus, a 15-year-old gang member who was now studying pre-med in college. About Jennifer, who'd aged out of foster care and was now running her own nonprofit. About David, who'd been arrested 12 times before age 16 and was now working as a counselor for other at-risk youth. "You've been doing all of this," Kevin said, "while we were telling you to get a real job." "I had a real job," I said. "I had the most real job imaginable. I was helping kids who had nowhere else to turn." "And now you're helping kids all across the state," Mom said, finally beginning to understand. "And influencing national policy." "The community center," Dad said suddenly, looking around at our wedding venue with new eyes. "You chose this place on purpose, didn't you?" I nodded. "This is where it all started. 5 years ago, this community center ran an after-school program for kids in the neighborhood. I volunteered here on weekends when I was working at the residential facility. Some of the kids I met here were my first success stories. And now it's the headquarters for one of our most successful community outreach programs. We serve over 300 kids a week here." Dad looked around the room, at the simple folding chairs, at the borrowed decorations, at the kids' artwork hanging on the walls, with completely new understanding. "This isn't a cheap venue," he said quietly. "This is your life's work." "This is where I fell in love with the work," I corrected. "And where I realized that success isn't measured by how impressive your office is, but by how many lives you can touch." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, my family lingered. For the first time in 5 years, none of us seemed eager to end the conversation. "Sarah," Mom said, "would you be willing to have dinner with us next week? Really have dinner where we listen to you talk about your work." "I'd like that," I said. "And maybe," Dad added hesitantly, "you could show us the programs you run? Help us understand what you've built." I smiled at him. "I'd love to." As Michael and I packed up the remaining wedding decorations, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 5 years ago, I'd been a recent college graduate with a passion for helping kids and a family who thought I was throwing my life away. Today I was a respected expert in my field, married to a man who supported my work, and finally reconnecting with a family who was beginning to understand that there are many different ways to measure success. "So," Michael said, carefully folding up the table linens we'd borrowed from the community center, "how does it feel to have the governor of the state walk you down the aisle?" I laughed. "It feels like the perfect ending to the perfect wedding. Even though your dad spent the first half hour complaining about the venue?" "Especially because of that," I said. "He needed to learn that the most important things in life usually don't look impressive from the outside." As we turned off the lights and locked up the community center, the same community center where I'd discovered my calling, where I'd built my first programs, where I'd gotten married, and where tomorrow I'd be back to work helping kids build better futures, I realized that everything had worked out exactly as it should have. My family had needed to see me succeed on my own terms before they could respect the terms I'd chosen. And I'd needed to prove to myself that my work mattered regardless of whether they understood it. Now finally we could build something new together. A relationship based on mutual respect rather than disappointed expectations. A family that celebrated different kinds of success instead of only recognizing one narrow definition of achievement. It had taken 5 years, a governor's intervention, and a wedding in a community center to get us here. But we'd made it,